Welcome to Dr. Green Speaks.
What's up, family? You know who I be. It's the kid again, Dr. Green. Yeah, you heard it. Listen.
Bridging the gap between scholars.
Read more books than the curriculum profile.
Doctors, athletes, and pop culture influencers.
Major show alert.
Oh. Ladies and gentlemen, this is it. And now, Dr. Green Speaks.
Bring them out. What's up, family? You know who I be. It's the kid again, Dr. Green. Yeah, you heard of me. Listen, remember when I told you that I'd have the most brilliant people across industries on this podcast? Remember I said that? Mm-hmm. You know how sometimes people say, it's not rocket science? Check it. Today, it is rocket science. Today, I have a friend and a brother. You know how in the hood we say, my man's in there. He just happens to be an astrophysicist, a mathematician, an inventor, an author, TV star, Stanford PhD. Listen, the list is just ridiculous. But one of the things that I admire the most about my man is that he's a brother from the Lou. Listen, I get to introduce to you none other than Dr. Hakeem Oluseyi. What's up, family?
I'm very well. Thank you, Dr. Green, my brother.
Oh, thank you so very much, man. This is an honor and a privilege to be, as I like to say, in the presence of greatness, right? So often you hear it's not rocket science, but it is rocket science today, family. So
right.
Tell all of our listeners out there, where does the story begin for you, right? Because I mean, as a black man and an astrophysicist, I mean, it's just mind-boggling because there's often such a disconnect, like that doesn't really happen. So where does the story start for you?
Yeah, first, bro, I want to say the feeling is mutual. Whenever I'm around my brilliant colleagues, my brilliant black colleagues, I feel like the luckiest man in the world, man, because I admire everyone so much. And it just reminds me, you know, when I was growing up, you know, every Sunday in church, you know, the brothers would be all smooth, you know, and then, you know, there was a lot more jazz in the world back then. And when those people would speak, you know, their elegance that they carried with them, bro, I just eat it up. You know, I just love it. So yeah, the feeling is mutual. And the fact that you guys consider me to be in your realm is an honor. Because I'm just trying to keep up. So where does it begin? It begins, to be honest, I lied. I'm not trying to keep up. I'm just trying to not suck. But
I know the feeling.
That's pretty much it, right? I always fear I suck. So I was born in New Orleans. And my family, you know, my immediate family is sort of like the coming together of two historic Southern cultures. So my father is from rural Mississippi, and my mother is from New Orleans East. And each one of them is sort of a family of immigrants because my mother's, you know, we know our ancestry going all the way back to my great-great-great-grandfather who immigrated to the U.S. as a free man. His parents left West Africa, went to France, where he was born. He went to Santo Domingo, where he had my great-great-grandfather, and they came to New Orleans. And I was born several generations later. And then I started looking at my father's side of the family and then realized, you know, what a genetic mixture I am, because it turned out that both my father's grandfathers were Irishmen. And his mother's mother was half Choctaw Indian, Native American. So, you know, I have at least 3 continents flowing through my veins. And so rural Mississippi and East New Orleans is where my story begins. And that's sort of the genetic heritage of it.
Wow. No, that's amazing. That's amazing. So let's talk a little bit about what it was like growing up in the Lou, right? Because people like you don't just arrive to where you are now, right?
No.
What that was like. Tell me about with the young Hakeem.
Oh, man, so the young Hakeem, bruh, so I had a crazy decade from the ages of 4 to 14 where I moved every year, and it was always in the hood, you know, and so it was in LA, South Central, Houston 3rd Ward, South Park, New Orleans 9th Ward, New Orleans East. So, you know, by the time I'm reaching puberty, you know, I'm in survival mode, right? And also identity is a big factor. The world is sort of messaging me and telling me, you know, who and what I'm supposed to be. And, you know, just out of really wanting to be safe, man, I took on the persona of the, you know, little badass, right? You know, and so I'm walking around smoking cigarettes at 12, and, you know, I'm in bars at 13, man, literally like turning up bottles of TJ Swan and
wow,
doing little business.
He said, doing a little business.
Doing a little business. Yeah, man.
Wow, that's something else. I mean, because
my father was a businessman, right? My cousins were engaged in activities, you know, so it was only natural.
Right. No, that's so that, you know, that's amazing, because, you know, it speaks to the possibilities that exist within young Black men that sometimes go unnoticed, right? That we look at, like, and I've often said, so I was a bad kid from Brooklyn, New York, right? So I was doing whatever I was doing, right? You know, statutes, limitations, right? Doing whatever I was doing, and there seems to be this complete disregard for young Black men today, as if, oh, they're useless, oh, they have no hope, oh, you know, look at this generation. So can you talk about where your switch happened? Like where was that turning point that you go from being, you know, this kid that's getting into trouble and has this, you know, identity of like, you know, being and how did that happen for you?
Yeah, man. So luckily, bro, mentoring in specific ways, right? So it was mentoring not for, you know, I'm going to mentor you to get you an education, right? There was really nobody around me who could do that. But it was more of mentoring of, we're going to make you disciplined and honorable, right? So what I had gone through had sort of like ingrained something deep into me. And I was kind of already drawn to the dark side anyway, right? You know, a part of that, you know how it is in the hood, right? So there's like, you could be boring, you could be athlete entertainer, right? You could be church guy, right? Or you could be Mr. Smooth player, shank you, right? You know, not I'm a goon, but I got game and I'm not to be messed with, right? You know, boom, annihilate you instantly type, you know, behavior. So, you know, it was a long, slow thing for me because, you know, man, I came of age in the crack cocaine era. I graduated high school in '85. It was just getting started, right? And so I went to the military immediately, but I got out of the military and I came to college to Jackson, Mississippi. And when you hear the word the Dirty South, man, Jackson was deep in it, right? And you know, my father's business was not that business.
Okay.
But it became that business.
Okay.
At that time. And so it became my business. And so it became a disaster for the communities I lived in Mississippi, Louisiana, Jackson, Mississippi. And, you know, it was rough, so rough. You know, I dropped out of Tougaloo. When I decided I wanted to clean up my life, you know, I got a job, the only job I could get at the time, which was being a janitor at a hotel. And so the change happened for me when I applied for the bellhop position and didn't get it.
You weren't qualified.
Well, in a way, right? So I'm making $4 an hour at this time. You know, the minimum wage had been increased from $3.35. This is my first $4 an hour job, right?
Balling. Crazy.
Yeah, right? Balling out of control.
All that money.
Man, and so I was living in the hood, man. I had an apartment in the hood, you know, and I'll tell you what's funny about that is, so I come to this little apartment. It was like a motel back in the day that they converted to an apartment. You know, the motel, you know, so it's like a U-shaped thing. Yeah. So I get in there, I see a roach or two. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to set off bombs all over this apartment, right? Boom. So I grew up with my mom, and my mom, you know, no matter what we lived, what hood we lived in, there was not going to be a roach found in Missy Lane's house, right? There will not be a crumb, a drop of water. So I'm like, I know I got these roaches, right? Man, I set off all these bombs. I'm living my life the right way, and yet roaches are still appearing. Bruh, one day the dude downstairs invited me in his apartment. I kind of avoided it because I knew what they were doing down there, you know. Man, I go to this dude's apartment, bro. We're sitting in his living room, and the wall just got roaches chilling on the wall. So let me tell you something about roaches biologically that I read. I don't know the degree of truth to it, but allegedly, you know, there are certain types of species that are uncomfortable unless their body is being touched on three sides. That's why they're always in nooks and crannies. They got to be touched on three sides. So if roaches are one of them, these German cockroaches. So if you see one out, that means all the nooks and crannies are filled. So when you see this dude's apartment,
he's homeless. You got a homeless roach.
That's right. They coming up to my spot, right? And check this out. So even at that, I'm so broke that the way I'm eating food most days is when people, you know, order their room service in a room and then they set the tray outside the door, I eat their leftovers. So imagine that. Hakeem living in the hood in the roach infested apartment because of my neighbors surrounding me got roaches. You know, and it's you know, somebody was murdered in that apartment complex while I lived there. That's what triggered me to move out of it. And you know, I go to move up from janitor to bellhop because a bellhop can get $100 in tips in a day, whereas I can't even make $100 a week. And I don't get the job. So in 2012, I was back at UC Berkeley, and I ran into another brother who's a PhD in mechanical engineering, Damien Roussan. And Damien says to me, Hakeem, you remember that story you told me about being a janitor and trying to move up to bellhop? I was like, yeah. He's like, bruh, I've told that story to 1,000 people since then. He says, because you know why? To me, that encapsulates what it's like being a black man in America. Whoever was evaluating you didn't realize that standing before them was a Stanford PhD physicist. They couldn't see beyond the kid from the hood, the janitor, that I don't want at my front door, right?
That's wow. See, that's so important because, man, that's breathtaking because that's a true indication or analysis of what it is like to be a black man in America. You see us, but you really don't see us, right? They don't see the physicists, they see the threat. And it, unfortunately, you know, we lose so many young brothers to the streets before we get to realize who they are and appreciate their gifts that they would present to society if they had the chance or had someone to see them differently.
And you know what, too, man, is that phrase, you know, like my favorite old school rapper was KRS-One, right? And you know how it is with rappers. Right. They will take some phrases that have existed in the hood for, you know, for 500 years to turn into a song, and the world is like, oh my God, they invented it, right? Like Michael Jackson moonwalking. Like, he did what? What? I could have sworn. Right. But you know, so it is one song. You know that song that starts, clap your hands, everybody, if you got what it takes. So I'm KRS and I'm on the mic, and Premier's on the break. Right? So we got that line. Let me show you whose ass is the blackest. Right? We've all heard that a billion times. And what that means is when somebody's treating you with an expectation of a low expectation, right? So in your mind, because here's the other thing about the whole mental aspect of things, right? And this is really interesting. So you have an idea of what the other person is thinking of you, right? And that context will determine your behavior. So if you are so I like to speak, you know, in America, we always talk in terms of black and white, right? But to me, you know, at this point, I've traveled to 41 countries around the world, and I see a similar phenomenon in every country, but it's not always based on race, right? And so it's a hierarchy, right? That's based on identity. And for those of you in your country, when you're sort of at the, you know, considered to be near the bottom of that hierarchy, then there are assumptions made of you, right? And they tend to be similar from country to country, right? About your morality, about your intelligence, about your, you're going to steal, you're going to kill, these sort of things. And so if you're a young Black dude and these people are treating you this way consistently, and sometimes the thing about the whole psychological aspect of it is sometimes when they're not, it'll be interpreted that way, right? And so you will sometimes be like, okay, well, I'll show you. Let me show you. You want to see Black? You want to see what's your expectation of Negro? Let me show you, right? And so coming from the country, right? I grew up, from 13 to 24 hours in Mississippi. When I went to the city for graduate school and I saw the public face of African Americans, right? I felt like, when you're in the South, you see the full spectrum of communities, all right? And you see that most people are just people, regular people, going to work every day, doing their job, right? But when you're in cities, who do you see on the street, right? You see African Americans, because some of the cities hide Black folks really well, But when you see people downtown on the street, you'll see the mentally ill. And quite often you'll see boisterous groups of young men, not because that's who's present, but that's who jumps out at you, right? And so, it feeds into these stereotypes because people are going to selectively see what they want to see anyway, right? And so, and so the shame is when we embody those stereotypes, but how can you not, it's almost impossible. So you find yourself having to repair yourself like I did, like others do to even have a chance of reaching your potential.
And I think so. And it's interesting how, like who's asked as the blackest is a good, like it's explained in the streets, and it's also explained, say, in criminological theory, right, where they talk about something called labeling theory, right, where it talks about secondary deviance, but basically just that when you start to present or identify people as something, they will become that thing, particularly when the opportunity to be something other than that is not available, right? So if you say, you're a criminal, you're a thug, you're a player, you're a gangster, and you put this identity out there, people, they will fulfill your
absolutely. And you know what? Is that it's not equal. It's not equal. Because if you compliment somebody about something, that doesn't necessarily become their identity. But if you attack somebody over something, that becomes their identity. If you start attacking Black Americans for their Christianity, you start oppressing the Christians, right? They're going to identify more with, it's sort of like being a Black person going overseas, right? Now you're an American, right? If you step foot in West Africa, a brother like me, they're like, you're a white dude. They're like, hey, I tell you, it's so funny because, I was working a lot in South Africa. And when I was not in Cape Town, people would assume I was a Zulu, right? Because of my physicality. Not, if I spoke, of course, the jig was up. But if I was silent, then people would assume I was Zulu based on my appearance. But in Cape Town, the mixture is very different. So I was sitting with these two African astronomers, Tebe Medupi, who's South African, and Pius Okeke, who's Nigerian. And so I asked Tebe, I said, Tebe, what would people consider me here in Cape Town? It's a lot more complicated. He goes, well, here, we probably consider you what we call a color, and Pius just starts laughing. And I'm like, what are you laughing at? He's like, I saw your name on the program, Oluseyi, it's a Nigerian name. And I wondered how could it be that there's a Nigerian astronomer I never met? And then when you stand up to speak, I thought, who is this white man with a Nigerian name? He's like, in Nigeria, you are a white man. I'm like, and sure enough, man, I went to West Africa and Bruni I was.
Well, it's amazing how identity or perception of identity shifts from place to place. And,
absolutely.
And if you're stuck on your little 4-block radius or in your hood or in your town or in your borough, right? You don't get to experience being anything else other than what people say you are or what your environment has defined you as. So all right. So you're a physicist. Come on, man.
Right.
Stop playing. Like, that's crazy. Stop. You know, like I said, they always say, oh, it's not rocket science. Kind of help the layman understand like what it is that either you do or how you see the world.
So first off, being a physicist makes you a weirdo, right? The type of physicist that I am, because you see the world differently. You know, once you know certain things about, you know, why things are the way they are. Like, here's a glass. Why is it transparent? You know, what is that? You know, or like when I ask my students, where does light come from? And I say, oh, the sun. I'm like, no. There's no sun. You know, it's nighttime. There's light in this room. They're like, oh, it's energy. And I'm like, no, it possesses energy. Where does light come from? And they're like, I'm like, okay. The short answer is matter makes it. Okay. Now, here's what I want you all to do from now on. Whenever you see light being produced somewhere, ask yourself, what is the matter doing on the microscopic scale to emit that light? If I see a candle flame emitting light, if I see a hot metal eye of a stove, or, you know, emitting light, if I see a firefly emitting light, right? What's happening microscopically? And so that's what I, you know, and then when I, you know, we look at the extremes, right? The very hot, the very cold, the very small, the very large. So for me, in astrophysics and cosmology, one of the weird things that happens to you is you begin to see the sky in 3D, right? You can, you know, you have a relative idea of the sizes of things, and you have a relative idea of how far away they are. And so when you look up at the night sky, you can be like, oh, I'm looking at the moon in orbit around the Earth, beyond it to Venus, which is near the sun, and then beyond that to Jupiter, right? And you can, you know, having this notion, but it's the same for your body, right? They're like the distribution of the mass, you know, like realizing that you're like mostly empty space, but you seem solid. But the only reason because you're so freaking far away from something so tiny that it appears solid, right? But in reality, it's, you know, so anyway, you just see the world in a completely weird, different way. But it's completely, you know, it's non-intuitive because our brains were designed for our survival, not designed for us to, you know, understand why glass is transparent and, you know, wood is not. You know what I mean?
Listen, man. All right. So based upon what you just said, I'm dropping your class. That's it. I'm
no, bro. You don't love my class.
I'm going online.
Class.
I'm dropping the class.
Packed.
Hold on, wait. I'm gonna see if I can take like Jim, because I need it. And you killing it right now. So no,
that's what people say. Go take Dr. O, because that's the easy A, right? That started for me in grad school when I wasn't doing any of the grading, and that's, you know, sort of when being an educator discovered me, right? When you say when did it start? You know, there's a lot of different starts, and one of them was the start of being an educator, which was something that I never set out to be. But what would happen is, you know, I was teaching observational astronomy at night to you know, earn extra money as a grad student. And suddenly, you know, there were 4 nights, and each night was run by a different grad student, okay? And, you know, the students would at first evenly distribute themselves among the 4 nights, but then eventually half the students would be in my night, right? And I'm like, what the hell? You know, that's more work for me, right? And they were like, yeah, people say you're giving an easy A. But the thing is that we didn't do any grading. The professor did a grade, and they were just performing better. Okay. And so I went to work in Silicon Valley, and I taught at this junior college and at night. And then, you know, people would go away, you know, you know, they take my class, disappear, come back to visit and go, hey, guess what, man? I didn't realize how cool science was. I didn't realize I could do it, but I took your class and now I realize it is, and it's something I can do and I can make money. So now I'm going back to school full time. Right. Yeah, and so the same thing happened when I started doing television, right? People stopped me in the mall. I could tell you from the hood, right? And you're like, dude, you know, me and my daughter, me and my son, we watch you, and now I'm going to go back to school. I think I can do science, right? So I'm like, everybody is always telling me, Hakeem, I thought I was dumb until I saw you, right? Right? But it's what we're saying. I speak a certain way. Like, it's not the way of the academy. And to be frank with you, the different ways of teaching that I've learned, like going into the military was one of the best things that happened to me in terms of learning how to teach someone else effectively. Because think about it like this, man. people that go into the military come from all walks of life, right? We call them the best and the brightest, but it is a distribution. So you're going to have the best and the brightest, and you're going to have the dumbest as well, right? Yeah, it's a curve. But guess what? Everybody does their job, right? And we're talking about jobs that are, if it's not done right, lives are lost, right? Right. And so the dumbest becomes reliable, learns their job well. Okay, and let me tell you, man. When I went into this military thing, I got to this program where they taught us how to, it was for taking enlisted people to be in officers, right? And so in our math class, there was two math classes, the regular and the remedial. I was in the remedial class, okay? And so the teacher, Mr. Galuli, he said, come in here every day with a sheet of paper number 1 to 70, 1 to 15, turn sideways, landscape, 1 to 15, then another row, 16 to 30, then another row, 31 to 45, all the way to 75. And I'm going to give you 15 simple additions, 15 simple subtractions, 15 multiplications, 15 divisions, 15 perfect squares. You have to know every number 1 to 25 squared, right? You come, you sit down, we give you 2 minutes. You got 2 minutes. We're like, okay. So day one, he's like, go. And we start going. And he's like, stop. We're like, he was serious? He was serious? 2 minutes, 75 problems, right? So, bruh, in a month's time, this is the remedial class. We're all blasting through them. To this day, ask me any of them, right? 17 squared, 289. I mean, and so I incorporated the way the military teaches into my academic teaching, because the academics, it's incredibly inefficient, I find, in my fields of physics and mathematics.
Right, and so I think that's really important. I mean, there are movements or discussions around having more Black teachers, more Black male teachers, more Black male professors, more Black women professors, and I think the case that you present kind of highlights the fact that there are different ways of learning, different ways of teaching, and different types of people can reach different types of people. Right.
That's right. That's right. But let me add something to that, because there is there's quite often an untold job requirement for jobs at particular levels. And you know what that requirement is?
No.
This unwritten requirement. You got to be square.
Got to be square.
Absolutely.
Break that down. Break that down.
Come on, man. Are you going to hire Snoop Dogg to be your vice president, your chief financial officer?
Wait.
Right. Why not?
Because
you know what his financial is, his style. It's not his substance.
Right.
Yeah. And so being being flavorful can work against you in in this world in which we occupy, right? And so that's why it's so, have you ever noticed what happens at mid-career? A lot of people go independent, or, they're just like,
can't do it.
Yeah.
No,
I can't do it no more.
No, like in education, like brother Christopher Emden, he's so cool, so fly. And the way he presents himself is so authentic that people often seem amazed, like, oh my God, he's so different. And it's like, well, if you open the door a little wider, you would find that there's a diversity of not just presentation, but intellect and brilliance. So,
the reason why such things can persist is because it's not like basketball, right? If you don't have LeBron, you're not in the finals, right? Chances are, you don't have LeBron and KD, right. So, but when it comes to a lot of business and intellectual stuff, it's not like that. It is not the case that, oh, you're so good. Your circumstances determine your performance, and if you're not, so if you are equally brilliant, you take the same person and you put them in a very well-resourced circumstance, or you put them in a situation where they're starved for resources, the outcome is going to be very different, right? And not only that, if you put a person in a situation where they have a single-minded pursuit, then you'll get the best out of them for that, whatever that pursuit is. But that's rarely the case for us, right? That you find that you have such a luxury, or that you may even want that luxury, because for example, in my case, I find impacting people's lives more fulfilling than any invention or discovery, and that was a discovery for me, right? I didn't think I was that guy. I wanted to invent, discover, and it just happened to happen and give meaning and fulfillment to my life, right? So that's why I continue to act on those in the ways that give me satisfaction and allow me to pay my bills.
No, I hear you. No, and so I often talk about the, like you said, that the environment absolutely affects performance. I mean, there was a time when I was in a PhD program, and I was going through some financial things, and no one knew it, right? We don't talk about it, right? We're not in this saying, "Whoa, it's me," right? I actually took it was the day of my comps, and there was a financial situation. So I live in Brooklyn. I was attending school in the city. So the morning of my comps, I didn't have money to get to school, right? So I got on my bike, right, and rode my bike with, I didn't have money for the train fare. I didn't have money for food. I jumped on my bike. I pedaled all the way from Brooklyn to Manhattan. So I'm sweating. I get to, my comps, and I park the bike and I run upstairs and I sit, we're all sitting at the computer. It's like one of the exams, I think, was 2.5 hours. And then we had another one that was like 3 hours long, whatever. But I'm sitting, and I get there, right? And I had some really cool cohort members. Shout out to Jennifer, Dr. Jennifer. You know who you are. Help me through a lot, right? So
right.
So I sat down and I'm taking the exam, and I was exhausted. I was sweating. I was hungry, and I had to sit through that exam. And then people at the break, when we got through that exam, people went to lunch to eat. I didn't have no money. So I said, I got to do something, walk around, and came back, had to take that next 3-hour exam. And those are the kind of things that they say. So you get the grades back, right? And you're like, oh, you pass, I pass. We all pass. Hey, everybody. But what my passing was for me, like what I had to go through just to get to the exam, are the stories that aren't told. And so environment and experience, like those are the things that people don't hear about.
Absolutely. Hey man, let me tell you something that you sort of sparked in my mind that's somewhat related. And it's based on the fact that once you go through certain things, you know what they're like. Okay. So when I do mentoring, sometimes, for me, there's two elements of it that are at the very beginning of the mentoring process: making a connection and breaking down any obstacles, any barriers. Okay. So my colleague, Charles Magruder, Western Kentucky, had this idea of how some of us African American astronomers could help South Africa to build their astronomy program. Okay. And so I knew that these students, when I went in there to work with them, were not going to see me as similar to them. They were going to see me as this fancy American, successful astronomer, right? So I'm like, what can I do to reach them? And I'm like, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll say to them what they think and experience, but they've never told another person and never will dare tell another person, right? And so at the time, me and the other Black astronomers would joke, the American Black astronomers, that I was the only Black astronomer who you could tell is Black on the phone, right? It was sort of like a self-criticism of who gets, how we could do better, have a broader more diverse group, right? But in South Africa, they weren't going to see me that way, right? They weren't going to, Right. But what they had in common with me is that I was also the only astronomer who had a successful career, who had come from a historically Black college. And so they would attend their historically underrepresented or underprivileged universities, transfer to top universities like Wits or University of Cape Town, and then fail out in this honors exam thing, right? So my job was to mentor them so they passed the honors exam. And just to give you the end of the story, my colleague there reported to me after 3 years, they're like, Hakeem, I got great news for you. Not only did all your students pass the honors exams, they all passed in the top 20%. But getting back to the story, what is it I was going to say to them that they experienced and never tell anyone? It's what I experienced, right? So you go from the hood to a top name university, for me, Stanford University, for them, the University of Cape Town. And you go home, they're like, hey, here's our genius. Yeah, he's out there in the world kicking butt. And then you go back to your university and you feel like they're like, Negro, go home. We don't want you here, right? You can't tell the folks back home this, right? And man, I said that to them and they just opened up, right? And they just talked about, all sorts of small things like, where I'm from, when people pass each other, you speak. So I'm here on campus and people walk past me, I say hi, they don't say a thing. I feel like a fool, right? Things like that. So you know what you made me think about? And I don't know if you can relate to this, but some of your viewers may. And it's something that happens when you haven't eaten for days, right? Now I remember I was in that state. And me and my buddy, Johnny Gavin, my high school classmate, arranged for me, him, and my other buddy, Reginald Lyons, to rake leaves so we could earn some money. And dude, when I talk rake leaves, I'm talking like an acre, 3 feet deep. I mean, like, dude, who's out there crazy? But you get paid, you go run to Popeyes to get a Chick Pack or whatever. You take your first drink or your first bite. Do you know what happens?
No.
When you hadn't eaten today, your mouth gets filled with this crazy pain. Right? It's just unbelievable. Like it's like you wouldn't expect that, right? You don't think of that. But if you haven't gone days without eating, you don't know about that. But if you have, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
See, and those are the things that don't get told. Those are the stories that are missing, right? That again, they see you successful career, TV, academics, like you're covering all the bases, but there was a time that you didn't eat, right? You didn't eat for days,
absolutely.
Right? And
absolutely.
I mean, there were times that I remember that I remember when I was, working, trying to get my little life together, and I didn't have any money. I bought myself. I was here in Brooklyn. I bought myself what's called cocoa bread. Right? It's it's real thick. For those y'all don't know, most of y'all watching will probably know what cocoa bread is, but it's so thick.
Yeah.
It's thick and a Sprite, and that's what I had. Right. And I'm gonna tell you why. And the reason why I had a Sprite, right, was because I refused to be eating bread and water. Like I was like, I'm not like in my head. I was saying I'm not going to do bread and water. Like it's not that bad. It wasn't.
Bruh, listen, I would do whatever it takes. Maurice, I would eat you, bruh. Let us get stuck on a deserted island somewhere. I'm like, look, I'm gonna start with a slice. I'm not. I grew up in the woods eating armadillos, man. I'm not, I'm gonna survive. I don't care. I'm gonna survive, bro.
Like I heard, who was it? Charlemagne the God. He said that he came from a place where if you ran something over, and roadkill. He said if it was warm, that's dead.
Oh yeah, fresh kill. That's happened a lot of times. Somebody, just ran over that. Yeah, man. Are you kidding me?
No, and that's that's I guess north, northeast, south, really different. Like he said, he said if it was wrong, he said that's better. I said
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you're not gonna if you see something dead on the road, you don't get that. But if you hit it, it's time to. We're eating good today or tomorrow, man. I hope it's one of my favorites. I hope it's a raccoon or something.
Cool.
So I can eat the face. Look, bro, if you don't know, you don't know.
See,
the face is delicious on every animal.
See that?
The face and the belly, Don't act like you don't eat mammal. Don't act like thinking that, oh, I don't eat a cow. I'm civilized.
You know what's funny? So this is where that diversity of experiences are, right? So
That's
I'm
right.
yellow, right? But then bougie, right? You like
right.
Like, yo, no, I grew up in the streets, man. We had welfare cheese. And then
hey, bro, let me tell you another example of that. When I was pledging my fraternity at Tougaloo, Tougaloo was surrounded by woods. And so, when Kappa's pledged, we're called scrollers. And so we call the woods Scroller Lane because, the big brothers could be like, meet us at this location. And the idea is you jump, you don't want people to know what you're up to, right? Other people on campus. So you hop into the woods at any location and you can hop out anywhere, right? But it's me and city boys going through the woods at midnight. They were like, dude, they would not feel. I was like, come on, man. What are you talking? Bro, I remember like stuff I wouldn't do today being a kid, 9 years old in Mississippi. And if I walked the road to go hang out with my cousins, I'd be walking for an hour. But if I cut through the woods, 10 minutes. So, bruh, I would go hang out with my cousins in the summer, start walking home at midnight or something, go right, not thinking about it. 9 years old, 10-year-olds walking through this pitch black woods, try to get me at this age to walk through those pitch black woods. Not happening.
Take a long while.
No. Yeah, I'm way more educated and reasonable. I'm like, hey, ain't no ghost getting me up in those. I hate getting me.
You learned some things at Stanford.
yeah, don't do that.
Like ghosts.
Yeah, ghosts and hate something. The old folks were right. They were trying to scare me. I wasn't scared when I was young, but I got old. I got scared.
You got some wisdom in your old age.
That's right.
So just for a second.
Go ahead. Yeah. No, go ahead. No, you go ahead, bro. Go ahead.
I want you to speak to what a lot of high achieving scholars and practitioners experience is called, what's it called? Imposter syndrome, right? Because going from that space of making it out of the hood or out of your community, and people are, oh, he going to college, and then you get on these campuses, and it's like, and I'm gonna shout out once again, Dr. Jennifer Ortiz, PhD. She is where is she now? She is. I want to shout her out. She's a assistant professor of criminology at Indiana University Southeast. She helped me get through my program. Like we connected. She's family. And I want to shout her out because there are those people that help you get through. And
absolutely.
And I got to shout out.
We all got them. You got to have shout out
right now. Our producer of these episodes, soon to be Dr. Deandra Taylor, who helped me get through statistics, graduate level statistics. I want to shout her out too. She's the executive director of the Black Doctoral Network, because there are these people that help us get through that we often don't, thank. So
absolutely, man.
So talk to us about like that getting on that campus. Like you went to a top tier institution, family. Like
bro. Yeah, man. It was it was shocking in ways that you don't expect. So I've always been open-minded. And by the way, you were talking about imposter syndrome. So that song, Kendrick Lamar, that I thought was like, this is brilliant because we hear it in so many ways growing up. And he laid it out. And I don't know the name of the song, but he says the phrase over and over again, beat your ass. You know that song? Yeah, right? Like you're a little black dude. Every time you turn around somebody, I'll beat your ass, right? Well, I didn't have imposter syndrome. I have him beat your ass syndrome. Okay. So one of the things about me that was just a lucky thing about me is that when people challenge me, my response was, I'll show you, right? When people thought that they were better than me or something like that, it was like, I'll show you. And that's what started me being a strong academically performing student. Because, I'm kind of, I'm a serious introvert, man. And I'm kind of like in my own head a lot. So, I was attending school, not really clued into school, as an elementary student. And then I attended, my first 4 years of school, first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade were integrated. Okay. And so I went to different schools in different states every year. So in the third grade, I was in New Orleans. The second grade, I was in LA. Third grade, New Orleans. First grade, Houston. The second grade, LA. Third grade, New Orleans. Fourth grade, Mississippi, right? In Mississippi and New Orleans, they did what's called tracking, where students were grouped by ability. And so I was aware of that in the third grade, and a kid pointed out that the black kids are in the tracks 3 and 4, the two slower tracks, right? And then when I got to Mississippi, it was the same way. And I had this buddy, and he and I were really competitive. And what's really funny is that he's a preacher that's well known. His name is Clifford McFarland, right? Clifford McFarland. But some people call him Dwayne McFarland. That's his middle name. But anyway, Pastor Clifford, look him up, people. But anyway, so he and I, we're out here playing on the playground, and this kid calls us the N-word, right? He yells like, keep the ball from the, Mississippi, quitting Mississippi. And so you advanced academically based on what are called levels, right? And so each level had a test. And once you passed the test with 0 problems, you advanced to the next level. And every student did the levels at their own pace. And so I was like, oh, y'all think I'm inferior? I'm gonna show you who inferior. So me and Clinton just got on those damn levels, man. And I ended up going all the way up to track 1 and being the first person to complete all the levels, right? But my teacher was not a supportive teacher of me, and she was like, yeah. Now, don't get me wrong. What's really crazy to me is, and people would make this assumption, when I went to hood schools, the teachers were really supportive. And people always assume, people not from the hood, that in the hood, the teachers, the teachers aren't this or that. I'm like, no, actually, they were really supportive. And when they saw me come through, they were like, for example, how I was like, there was one year where I had to drop out of the same school 3 times within like a short period of time.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, man, it was crazy. But and I remember the teachers just being like, "Oh my God," 'cause I had straight A's. And they were just like, "Oh, it was in the 3rd ward in Houston." So they had a kid. It's been gentrified now, but back then, the 3rd ward was like the 5th ward, right?
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, man. I showed up there, and the thing that was a surprise to me was class, not anything racial. So I had been in the Deep South in the crucible of race. And I get there, and it's not about race anymore, right? If you were a white dude with a deep Southern accent, I don't think you'd have been about as welcome as I would have been. Okay, because you could see it. You could see the black folks that were had a more integrated background did better. Like I said, it's that square requirement in a way, right? How people respond to you. Kind of like when Obama becomes the first black president, right? It's different than Al Sharpton becoming the first black president. It's a different thing,
Different vibe.
It's a vibe, exactly. It's a vibe. Yeah. So my vibe walking into Stanford, people responded to me in a particular way. Now, don't get me wrong. I am more of a, like one of my colleagues is a woman who studies astronomers. Her name is Dr. Jarita Holbrook. In fact, I'm going to do this other brother's podcast. They asked me for 5 inspirations, and the first one I wrote was her, because her hustle is so strong. This sister, she decided she was going to create her own field in astronomy, African cultural astronomy. But anyway, she said to me, she goes, Hakeem, have you ever noticed that all the black male astronomers who have survived in the field are either short of stature or have a high-pitched voice? And for most, it's both. And I thought about it, and I was like, oh my God, you're right. And she goes, yeah, and the only reason you survive is because you're goofy. And I'm like, goofy? She's like, oh, okay, you're disarming. You have this self-deprecating humor, so people don't feel threatened by you, once they get to be around you a bit, right? But that, yeah,
Wow. I mean, that's you shrink yourself into a box.
Yeah, so one of the things that happened, man, is that I arrived at Stanford and I looked around and I said, these people aren't intrinsically smarter than the people I knew in the 3rd ward. in the Ninth Ward, in rural Mississippi, in Southeast, in South Central LA. They're well better educated, and that's a class phenomenon,
right?
Not a racial phenomenon,
right. That's interesting.
Because class and race intersect, right? And so the thing about it too is that I think that we don't often give ourselves credit. So it was a Latino friend of mine, a close Latino friend of mine, who was like, man, one day, I really admire the African American community. You guys, I was like, admire us? What? I'm like, you guys, right? Yeah. They always show the numbers. We're at the bottom. And he's like, no, man, look what you guys have accomplished. You have all Black colleges. You're only this percentage of the population, but yeah, you're such a huge contributors to culture, and you have these bits. And I was like, you know what? You're right, man. From where we've come from to what has been accomplished. But I don't know if you have this experience as well. So I have a childhood of all struggle, right? The 80s had, the Reagan and those guys, the recessions.
Right.
And so then I go to Tougaloo College, right? And I graduated in 91, and then I go to Stanford. So I have my group of Black folks from Tougaloo, my group of Black folks from Stanford. And of course, life for Black folks in the 90s got better fast, right? In the 80s, how many people had a car? And then of those who had a car, how many had air conditioning? It was, cable, things like that, right? Like nobody got in the car with you unless they had gas money. That's in the 80s, right? Now,
yes,
right? But in the 90s, now you give somebody, hey man, I remember a friend told me, so after I got my first good job, making $5.65 an hour at the blood bank, my friend said this to me. This is another one of those things you don't think about unless you've been through it, right? My same buddy, Reginald Lyons, he goes, man, I bet you pull up to the gas station and get a full tank of gas, huh? Right? I was like, as a matter of fact, I do.
Right.
Yeah. Hey, let me tell you something else. Because people don't think about reality when they're talking about abstract notions of life, right? So in 2005, I was in Huntsville, Alabama, and I worked with this amazing organization called the North Alabama Center for Educational Excellence. They worked on Soft Money Brothers, and the two at-risk high schools in Huntsville are Johnson and Butler, and they had something like 85% college placement over 30 years, right, for the students. So I was working with them, and I was about to talk to these students, and this was right after Katrina. And so there was technical difficulties with setting up the projector. So the mentor guy started asking the students about the Katrina situation. And, like, what should those people have done? And some people are like, oh, they should have left. They should have drove out. And I'm hearing this, and I'm like, let me ask y'all a question. How many of y'all know somebody whose gas tank is on E right now? Right? You don't have to go take a look because you know it. How many of y'all know somebody who pulls up to the gas station and gets $2 a gas, right?
$2 gas.
Yeah, and so they're like, everybody, right? Of course you do. So how are you going to drive out of town? Like, come on, let's take this back to reality.
Right. No, that's really good. I know plenty of times I rolled up and said, so I got $7.50. Give me $6.75. I'm gonna keep some of this cake.
Look, who remembers the days of putting gas in and bouncing out? You can't do that anymore. Right? Hey, or the days of when ATMs were new. Oh, I'm just going to deposit an envelope and make a withdrawal.
Like the struggles and the difficulties that people face, like I said, often go not only but they act like, like we haven't been there. Like
right. Hey, but let me tell you, it's levels to it, right? So like this is a little known thing. I was a musician all my life, right? And I was rapping. I used to rap.
All right.
This is post Stanford. This is the 2000s, right? And so, I always hang out with these same dudes, the same studio, and they're always like, oh, don't put Hakeem on the camera, right? But one day I'm in the studio with these cats, all right? And they are the nicest dudes, from the hood. You know how it is. Like a stranger seeing them on the street, you're a brother wearing the brother uniform, they'd be like, oh, let me step to the side. Well, the nicest dudes in the world. But man, they start having a conversation about food at the different jails around the area. Like, man, what do you think about the food? I'm like, yeah, well, I don't have that. But bro, they were comparing the contrast, and they were going back and forth for a minute. You know, right. You just never know. You
never know people's lived experience, man. And what I really very much appreciate you sharing today, because again, this is the conversation that we don't get to hear. That there's a human side to some of the the highest achieving Black intellectuals and practitioners that we have. And great representatives of what is possible. Like, if we really look at and see our young Black men through the lens of possibility, as opposed to their present state. And I just very much have enjoyed sitting here talking to you. What I'd like for you to do is tell me what you're working on now. Like, I know you
absolutely. That's right. So my memoir, A Quantum Life, My Unlikely Journey from the Streets to the Stars, is available for pre-order right now. It is released June 15th. Okay. Now, before the pandemic, I met with this brother who we all know. And
we talked about that at the conference.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Brother Chadwick Boseman. And he loved my story. We met right before he gave the Howard University commencement speech. And if you look at his commencement speech and you see how passionate he was to find a story of someone who was a brother from the hood, but also actually had layers, right, and interests. So he took up my story and he championed it, and he did one pitch to Universal, and they picked it up, and we signed a movie deal. And that brother was so generous to me, and I got a very wonderful deal. He worked hard as anyone on making the story right. And I didn't even know he was ill. I knew something was up, but I thought he was just really busy. And then he passed away, man. And I realized how fortunate I was to have, just interfaced with him for those short amount of time. So that's coming up. The book, the movie, we'll see how that goes, because now everything's different with the pandemic has disrupted the movie business. And then finally, I have a new Netflix series coming out called Baking Impossible later this year. And on Science Channel, you can find How the Universe Works. The new season has just debuted. So that, look for your local listings, or you can even find it streaming on Discovery Plus, I think it's called.
So my dear brother, tell all of our listeners how they can get in touch with you, where they can follow you, because obviously you are one of the leaders that lead by example, and we want to know how to stay in touch with you.
Absolutely. So, I am like you, sir. I like to keep my hands dirty. I'm not on social media, Twitter fingering constantly, but I do check it daily. And I try to respond to everybody that writes to me. So if you put my name into Twitter or Instagram or LinkedIn or even Facebook, which I'm not there very much at all, you'll find me, Hakeem Oluseyi. Even if you put Hakeem in astronomy, you can find me. So turn on Science Channel anytime, pop my name into YouTube, and you can get content and hear what I have to say when I'm being more formal. That's what I love about your podcast, is that it's chatting with you.
Man,
is what it is.
Man, I very much appreciate that, man. I appreciate
what you're doing.
No, I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate who you are. I appreciate what you represent, my dear brother. I just want to again just thank you so much just for being you. And I look forward to the many things that you're working on. We are going to support it in every possible way. And I look forward to some things that you and I will be connecting on.
Absolutely.
We got some great things ahead. We are going to impact this world in ways that people have not even really come to yet. So again, thank you, my dear brother, my family. All right. And Dr. Oluseyi, you mean the world to me. And I'm like I said,
my brother.
Great things ahead. All right. Take care. Peace.
Take care.
All right.